What's up, friends? Dan Vega here, and today I want to talk to you about Jakarta. But before we do so, I thought it'd be a good chance to take a little trip down memory lane. Sound good? Let's go. Jakarta EE was formerly known as Java EE, the EE standing for Enterprise Edition, and this was a set of specifications used for enterprise development in Java. The first thing you should know is that this was owned and governed by Oracle, and the APIs got a little stagnant for a while, and there was no evolution happening in that space. That is when the Eclipse Foundation came along and said, we would like to take that project off your hands so that we might further evolve these APIs. Oracle agreed to hand over the project with one requirement. You need to rename all of the packages that start with JavaX to something else. The Eclipse Foundation said, great, we can do that, let's go. So why are we talking about this today? Well, in a recent video, I did a pretty in-depth overview of what's new in Spring Boot 3. One of the major themes is the move to Jakarta EE 9 and 10. So why are there two versions? So Jakarta EE 9 is simply that namespace change from JavaX to Jakarta. Jakarta EE 10 is now an evolution of those APIs. This is what's really exciting for me, is now that we're kind of caught up with what Jakarta has been doing, we get to take advantage of new APIs, new fixes, new features, all of that jazz, which is going to be very exciting for us as Spring developers. I want to look at one of those changes today, just one tiny little change. There are many changes in Jakarta EE 10. You can go ahead and find out more about those. I'll leave a link in the description below. But I want to talk about one of those changes. And that change is the ability to use a UUID as a primary key in Spring Data JPA. Now, there were ways to do this in the past, not all that friendly, but there were ways to accomplish this. But with Jakarta EE 10, this is very easy to do. So what I want to do is I want to create a new Spring Boot 3 project today and walk you through this change. So what are we waiting for? Let's write some code. We're going to start building a new Spring project like we do every single one over at start.spring.io. So first I need to choose my project type. I'm going to be using Maven, we're using Java, and we're using Java 17. I'm using the latest version of Spring Boot 3.0.2 at the time of this recording. I'm going to fill in some metadata here. I'm just going to call this dev.danvega. We'll call this Jakarta UUID. We'll also go ahead and choose some dependencies. So what type of application are we building here? Well, we're going to build a web app, so it's going to be Spring Web. We're also going to use Spring Data JPA to kind of go over this new feature in Jakarta EE 10. So with Spring Data JPA, we'll need a database, and I'm just going to choose an in-memory fast database called H2. That should be enough. So what I'm going to do is generate a project that's going to create a zip. And I'm going to open that up in my favorite IDE, IntelliJ Ultimate. You can open it up in whatever text editor or IDE you're most productive in. All right, before we do anything, I'm going to go ahead and dig down into the external libraries here. And if I do a search for Jakarta, I can see that there is a bunch of stuff in here, one of which is the Jakarta Persistence API is at version 3.1. That is using Jakarta EE 10. Also, when I start up my application, if I go into the console, I can see that we are using Tomcat 10.1. 10.0 was end of life. 10.1 is on Jakarta EE 10. Finally, we can see Hibernate ORM Core version 6.1. That is also Jakarta EE 10. So we are using a lot of the new Jakarta goodness here in our Spring Boot 3 application, and we haven't really done anything yet. So we're going to create a really quick kind of fictitious application, but it will point out what we need to cover today. So I'm going to create a new package. We're going to call this model, and inside of model, I'm going to create a new, let's say a new Java class. So we're going to create a new Java class for product. This is going to be our entity. So I'm going to mark it with @entity, and you can see we are getting that jakarta.persistence.entity. That is coming from the Jakarta namespace. So now what we need is we need an ID, and I'm going to use a type UUID. So this is a Java type UUID, and this is named ID. So we could do this in the past, but there were kind of some hoops we had to get around in this. What I want to do is say that this is my ID, but how is it generated? So this is going to be a generated value. The way that we're going to do this is by using the strategy. So there's a generation type, and now there's a new generation type in Jakarta EE10 for UUID. So it's just that simple. There are different strategies in here. If you go into the generation type, you can use things like tables and sequences, IDs, UUIDs, and auto. Now, I will point out, we are not going to get into the debate of whether or not you should use UUIDs for primary keys in a database in this video. I'm actually going to leave the thread. I have a Twitter thread here of a whole bunch of really good comments going back and forth on why this may or may not be a good idea and some of the things that you should look out for. So I would say go ahead and read through that and read through some of the different articles that were pointed out. Again, I don't want to get too involved in that in this specific case. I just want to show you the mechanics and how you can make this happen. So now that we have an ID, let's just add a few more properties here. I might add something called title, and maybe we'll add, I think maybe that's it. Let's just leave it at ID and title. So we're going to need a constructor. We're going to need a noarg constructor here for Spring Data JPA. We're also going to need another constructor that will take in a title. And then we'll go ahead and generate some getters and setters for both. And we'll also go ahead and generate a toString, and that will give us exactly what we need. So now that we have this, we need a way to persist some different rows to the database. So to make this happen, I'm going to create a new package. We'll call this repository. And inside a repository, I'll create a new Java class, and we'll call this product repository. This is going to be an interface, and we're going to extend the new list CRUD repository. If you're not sure what list CRUD repository is, I will go ahead and leave a link to a video in the description below that I did on this new repository that is in Spring Data 2022. So we're going to give it a type. The type of this is going to be product. The integer type, now we actually need the ID type, which is not an integer. We know it's a UUID. So let's come back here and let's say UUID, and that should be good. So now that we have a repository, we want to go ahead and create a couple of products in the system. So I'm going to come over to my application and I'm going to create a new bean, and we're going to use a command line runner to do this. So I'm going to return args, and inside of here we're going to create a new product. And actually, let's create 3 products. So to do this, I'm going to get an instance of the product repository, because that is a class, that is a bean that Spring Boot is managing for us, or Spring Framework, and more to be more specific. So we have an instance of Spring, the product repository. So we'll call this product repository. And in here, we'll say, I want a list of, and let's just create a few new products. So we'll say new product. Maybe we'll say that this is just product 1. We'll say new product, and we'll say product 2. And let's just add one more new product, and this is product 3. Okay, so now that we have a list of these, let's go ahead and create a variable called products. And inside of, now that we have a list of products, we can go ahead and persist those off to the database. So we'll use the product repository to say, save all of those, and we'll pass in our products, and those are shipped off to the database. Finally, I'm going to use the product repository to now find all the products in our database. I'm going to turn that into a stream, and then for each product in the database, I'm just going to do a good old system.out.println so that we can see all of our products. So that should be everything. We need to set up a few properties for our database. So I'm going to say, hey, I don't want you to generate a unique name. I want a database name of, let's say, data source name of products. And I want to go ahead and enable the H2 console. So that should be good. All right, I think that will give us everything we need. Let's go ahead and try to run our application. And there are 3 products. Actually, I didn't need to enable the H2 console. We just kind of iterated over them here and print them out. So as you can see, I have a UUID that was generated, and then I have each of the titles, product 1, product 2, product 3, and those are unique UUIDs for each of my products. All right, so I think that's where we will call it today. Again, the thing I really wanted to point out is that in the Persistence API 3.1, there is a new generation type for UUID. So now we can use that generation type and we can use the UUID type here in our product entity. If you found value in this tutorial, friends, do me a big favor, leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding. There we go.